r/AskReddit. Lawyers who read wills to families. What is the most interesting, bizarre, offensive, surprising thing you have had to read out loud? My grandfather, a Vietnam War veteran, suffered from PTSD. It got worse in his later years and he would often isolate himself from the rest of the family, often hiding out in his bedroom when visitors were over. My grandmother would often tell us stories about how he had inherited a significant amount of money from his father way back when. She said that in their younger years he often spent his inheritance on luxurious dates and trips. After returning from war, he spent the remaining money on a house in which he and my grandmother settled and raised their children. Fast forward to his death, just a couple months back, and we found out he had written the will. Even my grandmother didn't know about it. We all had assumed he wouldn't have much to leave, since most of the money he had saved from his time in the military was going towards taking care of him as he was placed in a care facility as his PTSD worsened. His will told of a warehouse in Township, Michigan that held a large collection of vintage cars. He said that the warehouse was passed down from his father, and he had all the documents to prove that he was the owner of some type of warehouse. His will estimated that the cars be worth in excess of $2 million total. The money from his collection would be split between his 4 children. We had no idea this collection ever existed. My father and his 3 brothers had all grown up in Plano, Texas. None of us had ever been to Michigan before. Even our mother couldn't recall a time of our father ever having even gone to visit Michigan. After a long debate, my father and I, the only ones who could manage to find some time off from work, agreed to fly out to Michigan to see this collection firsthand. After a few $1,000s spent on plane tickets, hotels, etc., we finally arrived at the warehouse my grandfather owned. It was a rundown warehouse, but it was tucked away within a compound of other warehouses that seemed to be otherwise well taken care of. Finally, code in hand, my father punched the numbers into the keypad and the giant door began to rise. What was inside was beyond words. There was absolutely nothing. Besides a few homeless people that managed to sneak in through a hole in the corrugated metal around back, there was no car collection. We were able to contact a few owners of the neighboring warehouses, and to their knowledge no one and nothing had ever been inside of those warehouses in the years they had been there. To this day we don't know what happened. We all just assume that the PTSD caused him to create some kind of fantasy in his mind. That maybe he purchased the warehouse believing it was a safe house for him if he ever needed to get out of Plano. To my daughter Anne, who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear 4th husband John, who laid hands on my Jane, I leave $1 you money grubbing bastards. To Jane I leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000 in my best gun which I'll leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he beats John bloody during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail, please. Other than names, this is the exact wording of a great uncle's will, part of it anyway. At age 9 Jane told her mother that John had molested her, and her mother told her she deserved it for being a slut. So great uncle took Jane in and raised her, and his 2 kids got exactly what it says. His son also got a truck and technically a house, although he only kept it until Jane was a legal adult and could afford the tax on it. Bill got full custody of Jane when his father died, and he put every penny of her money into a trust fund to mature when she was 25, because he felt like his sister would try to get the money. He was right. And in case anyone wondered, yes, Bill got his $5 grand. He didn't get arrested though, because John had a warrant on him, so they didn't dare call the cops. Bill did kindly inform the police of his whereabouts a few weeks later. My will has something unusual. Story time. I sat my wife down to have a talk because I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq. This was during the incredible sectarian violence, and I wanted to make sure she knew everything to do in case I died. She's never serious. Ever. But I wanted her to be serious for this discussion, because it was damned important. I get through telling her all about it, and want to know if she has questions. Yeah, so, the life insurance. How does that work? She says. I don't really know, baby. What do you mean? She answers, well, do they just put the money in there? When? Look, she's not trying to be an asshole, right? It's not like she's just dying for the money. She wants to know the logistics of it. I'm sitting here thinking when she says, so do they put in my bank account? Or do they give you one of those big checks when you win the lottery? As she holds her hands up like she's holding a huge check. Laughter ensues. I have it written into the will that if I'm Kaya, I want the $400,000 to be given to her with a gigantic lottery check. Have base photo bring several folks over, shoot like the paparazzi as she stands on a stage, and do it. Lol. Edit. Fixed some spelling errors. Not exactly a reading of the will story, but in the same realm. When I was like 20, my dad told me that when he died I would be getting a chunk of money. Not millions, but enough to do something good with. Years later he and my mom separated. He met a new woman and got married. After talking to my brother and sister, we were all worried that she would change his will or get him to change it in favor of her kids. We agreed that we didn't want money, but just wanted any final wishes to be honored. The money couldn't hurt though. Sadly, after that he got cancer and died 2 years ago. After he died, my siblings and I agreed to just accept however his widow divided anything. She made sure things went where he had decided. My percentage was smaller because he had added her and her children. In the 2 years since he passed, she hasn't talked to us much. She calls for holidays and stuff. She tries, but she is just kinda awkward. She's also sent large sums of money on 2 occasions because she sold some land he owned. She has shown me and my siblings that there are still good people. Sure, she might have kept most of the money, but she could have kept all of the money and we would never have known. Not a lawyer, but an estate planning paralegal for many years. I've read, drafted or executed thousands of wills and trusts with clients. My first nitpicky comment is that the common belief that lawyers actually assemble the whole family and hold a reading of the will is entirely a construct of TV. You would never sit there and just read a will to people. It's mostly a bunch of legalese about bonds and payment of taxes and the powers of the executor. Only a very small portion of the will actually pertains to distributions, and in many cases it's just a paragraph stating that everything goes to the spouse if living, otherwise equally to the kids, or to the trust, which then says it all goes to spouse and kids. Believe it or not, they're usually pretty mundane. When strings are attached, it's usually just parents trying to make sure their kids go to college or they get a smaller distribution, or just have to wait longer to get their money. People who don't have kids usually name about 2 dozen beneficiaries, which is cumbersome and annoying, especially since a lot of times they don't even have much money to divide. People with kids almost always just leave the money to them equally. Probably the most fucked up thing I've seen is a couple different clients who included provisions to disinherit kids and grandkids if they married a black person. That's their prerogative, and we'll serve them professionally, but we tended not to get too cozy or chatty at those signings, unlike with many of the nice clients with whom we would become friendly. Just get him in, get him out in those cases. Readings aren't typical with wills, those are mostly a Hollywood thing. Still, sometimes the will specifies a reading, usually, at least I've found, when the deceased wants to screw someone in front of the rest of the family. The strangest and most embarrassing reading was in a room crowded with relatives when a man who died fairly young, massive heart attack, early 50s, left absolutely everything to his 26-year-old stepdaughter, which was quite a lot of money and property. 2 ex-wives and children from the first marriage got nothing, nor did siblings, nieces, nephews, etc. The will specified that a DVD be played to explain why the stepdaughter was getting everything. Like everyone else, I thought it'd be the guy explaining the big fuck you to the rest of the family. What followed was completely unexpected. It was a hidden camera recording of the guy and his stepdaughter, at about age 15, having wild sex, which they both were very clearly enjoying. The video started in mid-coitus, with her screaming yes, oh god yes. It had obviously been edited to start with maximum shock value, and it worked, because it took about 30 seconds for me to recover enough to turn the thing off. Definitely the biggest holy shit moment of my career. I later learned that the guy and his stepdaughter had been having sex since she was 14, all the way to when he died, when she was 26. Apparently, though this is second-hand, and I can't confirm, there were multiple clips of various video bits through the ages on the DVD. At the end of the DVD the guy explains that the stepdaughter gets everything because she'd been the best fuck of his life. Worst part, the will specified that I was to give every single family member their own copy of the DVD. The copies had been kept in a box and had been distributed prior to the showing, so everyone had the best moments of in their hands at the time the DVD was playing. Epilogue: the family sued and lost. Believe it or not, the girl got to keep everything. Not a lawyer, and wasn't alive when it went down, but it is verified fact. My great-grandfather died somewhat unexpectedly, and when it was read, his will stated that everything was left to his grandchildren, while his sons had use of the income for their lifetime. Now, he had 5 sons from 2 marriages, and at the time the will was written, had 8 grandchildren. My father was grandchild number 9, and was born several years after his grandfather's death. But, since the grandchildren weren't named, he too was one of the inheritors. Shockingly enough, the 5 sons were able to live out their lives without fighting over the estate. Then, even more surprisingly, the 9 grandchildren got together and broke the will so their mothers could have use of the income. All 5 women outlived their husbands for their lifetimes. When the last of these women died, the 9 grandchildren again broke the will and had the estate distributed to the 8 grandchildren still alive by then. The estate wasn't really that large, tbh, not life-changing or never have to work again levels. My father was able to retire a few years earlier than expected, but that's it. I grew up listening to the negotiations between the 9 as they ensured their mothers would have money to live on, etc. It was, I've been told since, a very rare occasion of that many people managing to overcome stupid/short-sighted will wording to come to amicable agreement. Not sure it really fits with Op's question, but there you go. For starters, people rarely ask me to read the wills to them. Modern practice is to provide them with copies of the will if they are a beneficiary, or point them to the probate court to download it if they are not a beneficiary. In the pre-internet pre-e-filing days, I'd rarely read a will to the family. In the times I did, it was usually, meh, oh my god, what an asshole. As for some of the highlights, homemade wills. In most cases, they are so botched they wind up spending a ton more for me to fix it after the fact than having a lawyer write one correctly in the beginning. Not really a will reading per se, but there are a lot of cases where I discover that the decedent had another spouse and kids, typically in another country, that he never divorced. I got the wonderful job of telling the new surviving spouse that she wasn't technically married, bigamy laws and all, that her kids are bastards, etc. I hate that call. A common one is a decedent will leave everything to the responsible child, assuming, wrongfully, that such child will fairly administer the estate. I don't think I've ever seen it work. Responsible child is either in a bad child support situation, owes back taxes, in a bankruptcy, or just spends the money. Another common one are the decedents who leave $1 to whomever. Why do they do this? I have to go through a major pitter to notify them, provide them copies, etc. to give them a freaking dollar. Just cut them out of the will. If you really want them to know you hate them, then mail them a photocopy of your rear end. Don't make me involve the probate court system just to tell your family member to buzz off. I've seen a number of decedents overthink the hell out of their estates. They want a house to stay in the family, so they'll restrict the heir's right to sell it. Doesn't matter that the house is now a piece of crap in a now bad area of town, or that the heir can't sell, or mortgage it to stay out of bankruptcy, or pay for medical care, or they'll leave the, usually piece of crap, house to 15 children who don't get along. Ever try to sell a house with 15 owners? Or they'll appoint co-executors to administer the estate, to avoid one child feeling slighted. Newsflash: no one likes being an executor. The slighted child should be relieved. And if the co-executors don't get along when you're alive, it'll be 10x worse when you're dead. When I was about 11, my great-grandmother died. She was my favorite person in the family. I remember her loving demeanor. She was my favorite person to spend time with in the family. She was also very wealthy, came from Stanford educated family that owned many companies and not many children to inherit. My family is also very awful and money driven. They were waiting around for her to die. My family was very happy when she died because they got access to millions. They all fought over it, who got the lead diamonds, her house, and jewels etc. At 11 I refused to go to the funeral because they just went to pick through her stuff, and it made me sad. All parts of the family came back from the funeral with moving trucks full of the stuff they wanted. I did ask for her recipe books. I never got them. My family brought me back the creepiest thing they could find in her house, an antique glass doll that looked like it was out of a horror movie, and kept everything else for themselves. I look back, and I'm so glad I was able to recognize this at 11 years old, and I'm glad that didn't get drawn into my family's awfulness. I'm glad that I'm the black sheep of the family, and that this was something that distanced myself from becoming anything like my family. And just in case anyone actually reads this and is wondering, yes, my family does have a lot mental/personality disorders, and I always distanced myself from them. I grew up and got away from my family and have nothing to do with them now. And in regards to my story, my family lost all of the inherited money due to poor decisions. My great-grandma is still my favorite person in my blood-related family. Edit. Sorry for bad spelling. And grandma, I typed this on my phone. Mumble. Years ago my mill died. She had no will, but she did own a home and had a nice retirement and such from having worked for Marbell for 45 years. She had been a single mom for many years and had recently married a man she'd been keeping company with for a lot of years. She had invested some of her money in a home her husband owned and then had his name put on everything else, as she said she trusted him to do the right thing if and when the time came. She had 2 children. He had 1. In and of himself, I do believe she was right. He would have split her assets equitably. Why she didn't get it done by a lawyer, I have no idea, except she hated any attorney. Okay, Mill dies, we go for the funeral. The night she was buried, I'm sitting there asking her husband what he would like for dinner. He didn't answer. I asked again. His eyes roll up, and he slides off the couch onto the floor. Dead. EMTs came. He was gone. He doesn't have a will either. Another funeral to go to. The day he's buried, it's decided to go through the house and decide what to do with personal belongings. We do. It all goes fine. Then, I had to push to get everyone together to meet with an attorney so everyone can decide what to do about probate, distributions, etc. The 3 kids all decide to use the same attorney. It's a very small town in the deep south. Law says that, since she died first with no will, once probate is settled, all her assets go to him or his representative. In his case, her assets will go to his daughter along with all his assets, since he survived her. Only thing exempt were some IRA she left in her children's names. I begged them to make an agreement at the attorney's office, sign it, and then they'd have it in writing. You see, the law in that state said anyone could contest the estates within a 6-month time period. After that, probate would kick in. They told me this is what they were going to do, since after all, they knew each other, had been friends for years, and I didn't know how decent Southerners behaved. Really? I'm a Southerner too, just from a different part of the state. I begged, saying please be reasonable. Nope, I was ignored. Well, I think you know what happened. In 6 months, the daughter and her hubby took it all. Mom's kids wound up with nothing. No one said squat to me, nor I to them. Hubby and I wound up getting divorced shortly thereafter. It always pained me a lot to know they got nothing when she was the one who worked so hard and had all the assets, yet because of stupid decisions and greedy people, the no good daughter of a guy who hadn't saved squat got it all. I was trying to help them, that's all. My maternal grandfather passed away 11 years ago, leaving his home to his 4 children. with a lot of stipulations. My uncle never married and still lives there, and until he dies or decides to move out, no one gets a share. Another uncle owes the estate upwards of $50,000 and cannot receive a share until he first pays back the $50,000. The house is now worth around $700,000, but the $50K cannot be deducted from his share. Anyway, he had bone cancer and my mother and I lived with him and cared for him. I'd cook, clean, give massages, wipe his ass, etc. until the day he died. He left my mom the content of his bank account with a stipulation that she use it to pay off any remaining debt, hospital bills of his, which she did, leaving her with nothing. This pissed off 2 of the other siblings, and they still give her crap about it. She has rheumatoid, psoriatic and osteoarthritis. Sorry, not trying to turn this into a sob story, just getting to a point, but has to work full time at Costco to barely make ends meet. He did have a hefty life insurance policy, but because she and I didn't want to attend church services because of the politics within the church, he left it all to the pastor and his children, and some to the church, to build a new auditorium. While it did really hurt that he basically left us with nothing, he was a very good man. He was extremely generous with his time and money, a very hard worker, devoted, kind, etc. At the end of the day, he instilled some really great values in me, and I appreciate it so much I named my son after him. Unfortunately, he also left behind some bitter family members, causing tension in the family, and even caused the congregation at his church to split in half. I'm not completely sure what was going on in his head. So my father was dying. I'm 12. He had a will made up months before he died. My mother was worried, if things weren't in order, that some shady fuck would pop up. Naturally they did. For example, his ex-wife who tried to siphoning money from him even when their 2 kids were in their 30s. I'm sorry, but fuck you for that. Plus she had made my mom, me, and 2 siblings look like shit to everyone she knew. So naturally my dad wrote her off, not allowing anything to her 25 years not married. Says you ain't entitled to shit. Like the spoiled child wanting dessert when they haven't eaten dinner. So we tried to drum up a lawyer to sue my mother to have the will add her in it for money. So it goes as such. My father signed the updated will 4 days before he died. Lawyer had it notarized and approved. My mom was to inherit his business, which had been running for the last 6 months anyways. He made her the owner before dying and boss of it. Funeral and wake. This bitch walks in drunk as fuck. You're gonna give me what I deserve. To which his family stood up and kicked her ass to the curb with my half sisters. Dumb cunts. Well, at the funeral they make a scene to embarrass my family. Went around saying she was having an affair with my father. The dying man with cancer fucking you. Even when my mom was there every day until he died. Yeah, okay. Back to the will. Well, my mom shows me the will. My father had flat out done what he promised to do. To make sure that whore of a cunt, his words, was to never receive any more of his money, because that way we could be free from her for good. Sues my mom. Her lawyer pretty much turns around to this cunt and her lawyer. Good luck. First off, you divorced over 20 years ago. Second, your fucking kids are adults past any age for them to receive funding like this. Third, all money made you're asking for was made when he married a second time, thus cutting you off altogether. Hell, the guy gave you money when the kids were 25 and 30. So now you're pissed your meal ticket dried up. Never again did we hear about it. Maybe once when my mom got the call from the lawyer saying they dropped the suit. My neighbors as well experience. 5 siblings. 3 girls, 2 boys. Her bad brother sucked up to their mother 4 years. He didn't care much for their dad. The mother died first. At this time their dad was in the beginning stages of dementia. No one knew this yet though, because it can be subtle. People with dementia are gullible. Bad brother sucked up to him and got their dad to leave home everything. He badmouthed his siblings to their dad. Dad, being demented, believed it. He didn't take care of him or anything. My neighbor missed out on the last months of her dad's life. My neighbor had to take him to the hospital multiple times. They weren't wealthy or anything. Bad brother inherited the house that his parents lived in, everything in it, the animals and a river property that he had been living in, because he's a mooch. His brothers and sisters were not pleased. They took him to court. My neighbor only wanted to know their whereabouts of her dad's beloved pets. They lost. She also found out her bad brother shot the animals. Calm as a bitch though. The litigation process was difficult on bad brother's health. He had a stroke and died. Without a will. Without any children. With no living parents. Guess what happened to his assets? They got divided amongst his siblings. Unfortunately her other brother thinks the river property should be 100% his. One of her sisters signed her share over to him. She and her other sister want the property sold and money divided. He doesn't want to do that. Money makes people so greedy even when there isn't that much money to begin with. I don't understand something about people's reactions to these stories. So when a child or grandchild is a complete punk, and the will says they get nothing, we seem okay with that. We assume they must deserve it. If they get angry about it, we assume they are petty and value physical things more than love. That seems odd to me. The point of denying them these things was to hurt them emotionally. Often it's relative to siblings. One gets a lot, the other gets nothing. I'm not sure how I would react in the event of my parents' death, but I do know that if they had gone out of their way to exclude me from inheritance, that would have a real emotional impact on me. I'd be wondering what I did wrong. I would feel hurt by someone I love. Someone who is no longer here. I imagine a lot of people wish the government would change it, just so that they feel like the original is a mistake. They probably need that emotionally. For example, the 3 well-off kids whose parent gave the money to charity. I get why the parent did that, but if money and objects can be used to hurt people when you deny them, what does it say when you give your children nothing? Sure, we all want to raise our children to the point where they no longer need our help. But as we have seen in several examples in this thread, inheritance is not solely about monetary value. It's about what you are saying to your loved ones as you leave this world. The parent that left their children nothing, what did they say as they left this world? I see so much hypocrisy in this thread. People agreeing that it's okay to use denial of inheritance to hurt someone, as long as they had it coming, but then acting surprised that someone would be upset at being on the receiving end of that. The sad part of it all is that in most of these cases it seems like it is obvious who the real assholes are, but they have forever escaped the consequences of their actions. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.